You really thought I'd still be the kid you wrote off?" I said, staring at the row of familiar yet alien faces on my porch. It was Sunday morning, crisp with the faint scent of freshly mown grass, and the last thing I expected was a parade of the family who had ignored me for over a decade. My name's Ethan, I'm 36, and seeing them standing there, waiting like entitled royalty on my property, hit me with the same disbelief as spotting intruders in your kitchen. My grandmother, Linda, Aunt Marcy, Uncle Robert, my cousins Mason and Logan, and my older brother Kyle with some blonde I had never seen before, there they were, in the same space where my past disappointments had been ignored for so long. I was in my garage, bent over the frame of a custom motorcycle I was restoring when the Ring doorbell started ringing. I froze, my blood running cold. This wasn't just a visit. It was a calculated display, like they were showing up to witness my life and decide if they approved. I watched them through the app, huddled and whispering, clearly psyching themselves up for a confrontation that they assumed would be mine. Their cars were modest. The beat-up Honda that Kyle drove and a rental that Uncle Robert probably expensed somewhere quaint reminders of the life I'd once been part of but had grown beyond. To give you some context, I grew up in a working-class suburb of Houston, Texas. My dad, Mark, worked the night shift at a chemical plant, and my mum, Diane, held a part-time job at a local dental office. They were good people, well-intentioned, but success in their eyes meant conformity, college, a corporate job, a modest home, and retirement with a pension. Kyle was their shining star the strata student, football captain, scholarship recipient. I, on the other hand, spent my childhood taking apart lawnmowers, building tree houses that looked more like architectural feats than children's play spaces, and learning welding from YouTube videos. I was creative, hands-on, and curious, but that translated into disappointment in my family's eyes. Every family gathering was a painful reminder of the hierarchy they imposed. Kyle sat in the best seats, sharing every accolade with our grandmother, who kept score like a general with her soldiers. Meanwhile, I squeezed between younger cousins at the kids' table, being the perennial creative failure. My parents' pride in Kyle's achievements was unconditional. My successes, woodworking projects, small carpentry jobs, even backyard builds, were met with polite acknowledgement and swift transitions to "Did you finish your algebra homework?" Each Sunday dinner at Grandma Linda's house was a subtle gauntlet, jokes, comparisons, and silent evaluations of worth that left me shrinking in my chair. By the time I turned 17, the differences were glaring. While Kyle was being lauded for academic achievements and dating the right girls, I was skipping classes to work construction gigs on weekends, quietly making more money than many adults in our family. I had saved over $15,000 by senior year, more than my parents had in their emergency fund, but pride never crossed their minds. Instead, I was embarrassing the family, wasting my potential, and worse, not living up to the standards of our name. Every conversation about my future was a battle. Every suggestion to start my own business or follow a non-traditional path was met with skepticism or outright dismissal. That weekend, after years of being dismissed, overlooked, and belittled, I had built something that even they could not ignore. My construction company, a modest operation I started with my savings and a small loan against my truck, had grown beyond anyone's imagination. Yet as I watched them on my doorstep that morning, I felt a mix of curiosity and vindication. They came expecting the old Ethan, the one who begged for approval and waited for acknowledgement. They were about to discover that the version of me they had known no longer existed. I straightened up, wiping grease from my hands onto a rag, and walked toward the front door, boots clicking against the polished concrete. Their nervous glances told me everything. They had rehearsed this moment, planned their entry like it was a triumphant reveal. What they didn't realize was that the person standing behind the door had spent the last 10 years turning rejection into success. 10 years of long nights, early mornings, and unrelenting focus had brought me to this point, and I intended to let them feel the full weight of every year they had ignored me. The door swung open, and I let them in. Their eyes widened instantly. Vaulted ceilings, a grand staircase of walnut, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking my engineered lake, and a living room that could host 20 people comfortably. I could almost hear their thoughts. How did he get here? It was subtle, but the expressions were unmistakable. Grandma Linda, usually stern and rigid, hesitated mid-step, her carefully curated facade cracking as she took in the space. Aunt Marcy forced a smile, and Kyle's new wife, Brittany, whispered something to him while casting glances around, clearly calculating the value of everything in the room. I offered them coffee and pastries, keeping my tone neutral, calm. Small talk, safe topics, weather, traffic, weekend plans. Yet each word was carefully measured. I wanted to see how deep their shock would go. Tyler and Logan, my cousins, couldn't stop low whistles and wide-eyed stares, their chatter broken with whispers to each other. Kyle shifted uncomfortably, clearly unused to being outshone by the brother he had spent years dismissing. Uncle Robert adjusted his tie, an attempt at authority. But the aura of the house, the years of work, sweat, and dedication evident in every corner, spoke louder than any lecture he could muster. "Wow. Ethan, this is incredible," Mason said, unable to hide the admiration in his voice. How much did this cost?" I didn't need to answer fully. A simple shrug, a smirk, and I let my actions do the talking. Every custom fixture, the imported stone, the workshop filled with hundreds of thousands in tools and equipment, the F350 dually in the driveway, and the vintage car under restoration, it all screamed one undeniable truth. I had built a life of substance while they had been living in appearances. Grandma. Linda's eyes lingered on the handcrafted fireplace, then the floating staircase with hand-forged iron railings. It was clear she was reassessing her lifelong narrative about me. The grandson she had written off as a failure was standing there, unshakable, successful beyond expectation, and entirely self-made. I let silence fill the room for a moment. Their discomfort was palpable. Brittany, sensing the tension, leaned in with her usual confident tone. "You know, Ethan," she said, glancing around, "Kyle has been struggling since his divorce. With what you've built, you could help the whole family." Her words were carefully framed, polite on the surface, but the underlying message was blatant. They expected me to provide financial support after years of exclusion. I smiled faintly, shaking my head. "Interesting," I replied calmly. "You want to know what the last 10 years looked like from my perspective?" I leaned against the mantel, letting my gaze sweep over them, because it wasn't just a hiatus from family gatherings. It was 10 years of being dismissed, belittled, and treated as though my choices and efforts were meaningless. Kyle opened his mouth, trying to explain, but I cut him off gently, firmly. "We weren't not as close as we should have been. You cut me out, completely. Birthday cards. Never. Holiday texts. Nope. Invitations. Not a single one. You married, twice, without telling me, and you've lived your life with me erased from it. That's the reality you want to ignore, isn't it? The silence was thick, oppressive even. Their rehearsed scripts had evaporated. All the polite smiles, the assumptions of control, the thinly veiled superiority they had nowhere to hide. I walked them through the story of my years, the construction jobs I took as a teenager, the savings that grew while they boasted about college grades, the nights I slept on invoices, the early mornings learning every trade skill imaginable. I described the small studio apartment above a garage, my first workshop, the painstaking attention to detail that turned Rodriguez Construction into a thriving business. I spoke of the projects I was most proud of, the clients who trusted me, and the crew members whose lives I helped build. Each anecdote hit harder than the last, and I watched the color drain from their faces as reality collided with the image they had long dismissed. When I finally reached the donations, the hospital wing, the scholarship fund, the shelter, I saw Aunt Marcy wiping at her eyes. Grandma Linda, her hands clasped, trembled slightly, and Brittany's confident posture faltered. They realized, perhaps too late, that the Ethan they thought they knew was not just successful. He had been building a life of meaning, impact, and integrity long before they bothered to notice. I let them absorb it. No raised voice, no harsh words, just calm, undeniable truth. The same hands they had once dismissed as just tools had created something lasting, something real. And in that quiet, I knew something essential. This was my moment, my life, and the past could no longer control how I interacted with them. After a long pause, Aunt Marcy cleared her throat, the universal signal that she was about to speak for the real reason they had come. Ethan, we've been thinking about family lately, she said, her voice carefully controlled. And Kyle is going through some financial difficulties with the divorce settlement. We thought, maybe you could help. I tilted my head slightly, letting the words hang in the air. Help. After 10 years of ignoring me, dismissing my efforts, and treating me as a family embarrassment, now they expected a check. I kept my expression neutral, calm, but inside, a slow smile formed. This was the moment I had imagined, the moment when the weight of 10 years of dismissal would finally hit them. Kyle fidgeted, avoiding my gaze. It's messy, he muttered. Brittany chimed in, with her usual confident tilt of the chin. You have the resources, Ethan. You've built so much. Family helps family, right? Her tone was honeyed, polite. Yet the underlying meaning was clear. They wanted me to finance the consequences of their choices. I laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but deep, genuine laughter that echoed through the grand foyer. Family helps family. I repeated, walking slowly around the room, letting my steel-toed boots tap against the stone floor. Let me tell you about family. Family doesn't show up for your weddings, ignore your accomplishments, or erase you from their lives for a decade and then expect a payout because life finally gave you leverage. Their faces drained of color. Brittany's confident posture faltered, and Kyle's mouth opened, then closed, as if he was suddenly aware of the audacity in front of him. I pulled out my phone, swiping through my banking app, investment accounts, and business revenue spreadsheets. I turned the screen slowly toward them, letting their eyes widen as they realized the scale of what I had built. This, I said, pointing to my checking account balance, is just the beginning. Multi-million-dollar business revenue, investments, properties. The house you're standing in, paid cash. Workshop full of equipment worth more than most people's homes. Trucks, vehicles, vintage cars, under restoration, hundreds of thousands. And yes, it all came from me, my sweat, my dedication, and my decisions. Brittany stammered. But you just got lucky. I smiled, almost gently. Luck. Let me tell you what luck looks like. 15 years of long weeks, early mornings, late nights, building a reputation for quality that commands premium prices, learning every aspect of the business myself, making careful, calculated decisions. That's luck, apparently. Kyle's face flushed red. Ethan, I didn't realize. You didn't realize. I interrupted, firm. You never realized because you refused to see. You ignored my calls, laughed at my work, dismissed my achievements. And now you want to rewrite history because I'm successful. Silence filled the room. Even Aunt Marcy, usually quick with a smile, looked as if someone had removed the ground beneath her. I showed them the evidence of the life I had built, not just for myself, but for others. The children's hospital wing I had funded, the scholarship program for aspiring tradespeople, the shelter I had built and furnished with my own crews. Each image, each story, landed like a hammer on their constructed narrative of me as the family failure. Grandma Linda dabbed at her eyes, overwhelmed. Ethan, we didn't know, she whispered. But the truth was clear. They had known. They just hadn't cared enough to pay attention, Brandon. One of my cousins finally spoke, a trace of sincerity in his voice. Ethan, is there any way we can make this right? We know we messed up. I cut him off gently, letting the weight of 10 years settle in. Family means more than blood. Family means respect. Family means support without envy or ulterior motives. You never gave me that. I built that life elsewhere, with people who deserved it, who understood what it means to be there for each other. Not because of DNA, but because of choice and integrity. The room was heavy with silence. Brittany's face turned pale. She realized the miscalculation in her approach. Kyle lowered his eyes, ashamed. They had expected to waltz in and exploit the brother they had dismissed, but instead, they faced a man whose success was entirely his own and whose principles were not for sale. I leaned back in my chair, letting them absorb it. Their visit had backfired spectacularly, and I could finally enjoy the quiet, the satisfaction of 10 years of hard work and resilience confronting hypocrisy. The past, with its slights and insults, had no power over me anymore. I had earned every brick, every beam, every dollar, and no one could take that away. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sunlight catch the lake outside my property, the calm before a storm I was about to unleash. You want to know what family looks like? I asked, turning slowly toward them, letting my gaze sweep over every uncomfortable face. Family doesn't judge your choices based on appearances. Family doesn't erase you when you take a different path. And family sure as hell doesn't show up expecting charity after a decade of neglect. Grandma Linda's hands trembled as she clutched her handbag. She opened her mouth, tried to speak, but words failed her. Kyle shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Brittany, who looked suddenly very small in the enormous living room. I could feel the energy shift. The narrative they had rehearsed, the story of the struggling brother they'd finally discovered had money, was crumbling with every measured word I spoke. I walked over to the massive walnut staircase, letting the polished wood creak under my weight, my steps deliberate. You see this house? I said, gesturing with a sweep of my arm. Every beam, every tile, every fixture built, designed, or carefully selected by me. Every piece represents years of dedication, sacrifices you never acknowledged, and nights spent working while the rest of the family worried about what to wear to cocktail parties or football games. Tyler muttered, "Man, this is insane." But the awe in his voice was mixed with guilt. Brandon's eyes darted toward the floor, avoiding my gaze. They were finally starting to understand that they hadn't just underestimated me. They had ignored a life being built right under their noses. I let them linger in that discomfort for a moment. Then I pulled out my phone again, this time showing them the flood relief project I had spearheaded last month in East Texas. 6 trucks, dozens of people, 2 weeks of volunteer work, families helped back onto their feet. "Do you see this?" I asked. "This is what family is for me. These people are my family. We chose each other. We show up when it matters. We don't keep score based on how long someone's been ignored or how much money they think we have." The silence was suffocating. Brittany's confident facade cracked entirely, and Kyle's voice finally broke, whispering, "Ethan." "I know," I interrupted, my tone firm but controlled. "You don't get to rewrite history. You don't get to claim closeness now. You've had 10 years to show me who you really were. Actions speak louder than words, and right now, your actions tell me everything I need to know." I walked back to the foyer, unlocking the front door. "You're welcome to leave," I said, voice calm, measured. "I've made it clear what family means to me. If you want to be part of that, it starts with respect and understanding. Until then," I gestured toward the door, letting the message sink in. "This is where our interaction ends." They filed past me, their faces pale, the weight of their audacity finally crashing down. Kyle lingered for a second, guilt written across his features. "Ethan, maybe. One day." I looked at him squarely. "One day," I said slowly, "starts with proving you can stand on your own, treating people with respect, and learning that money doesn't erase past mistakes. Until then, consider this chapter closed." As the last car pulled away down my private road, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. 10 years of expectations, judgments, and disregard dissolved in that moment. I locked the door behind me and walked back into my living space, breathing in the familiar scents of wood, stone, and leather. This house, this life, this freedom, it was mine. I had built it with my own hands, and no one could take that away. I walked toward my garage, where the vintage Chevelle waited, gleaming under the morning light. Some things, I muttered to myself, are worth restoring. Some things are better left in the past. I climbed into the driver's seat, the familiar smell of motor oil and leather enveloping me. The engine roared to life, the vibrations under my hands a reminder of every hour, every sacrifice, every choice that had brought me here. For the first time in a decade, I felt completely free. Free from their judgment, free from their manipulation, free from the family that had never truly seen me. And as I drove out onto my private road, the sun rising over the hill country, I smiled. Life had finally balanced itself not through revenge, but through living well, authentically, and on my own terms. The house was quiet now, every echo of their footsteps gone, leaving only the soft hum of the lake outside and the faint creak of the floorboards beneath my boots. I poured myself a cup of coffee, letting the warmth seep into my hands, and reflected on the last 10 years, the fights, the late nights in my workshop, the sacrifices that no one acknowledged, the moments I had doubted myself. And yet, here I was, standing in a house I had built with my own hands, with a life I had designed from scratch. A message popped up on my phone from my foreman, joking about a poker game later. I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. Family dinner, right?" The humor was a bomb. I realized then that my family, the ones who had shown up expecting checks and favors, were no longer the definition of family for me. Family wasn't about blood or obligation. It was about trust, loyalty, and mutual respect. And those were the principles I had built everything on. Over the next few days, I reviewed the events in my mind repeatedly. Brittany's entitled words, Kyle's half-hearted attempts at reconciliation, Grandma Linda's shocked expressions. They were all symptoms of a family that had tried to gatekeep love and approval for years. I understood now that their visit wasn't about mending relationships. It was about attempting to reclaim a piece of success they had ignored for so long. And I would not let them manipulate me into validation or financial aid. Instead, I focused on the people who had supported me through my journey. My crews, my clients, the kids I sponsored in the scholarship fund. The families I helped rebuild after floods. These were the connections that mattered. I remembered showing them photos of the children's hospital wing and the shelter I had built. Their faces had gone pale, realizing that while they had spent years worrying about appearances, I had quietly been creating impact that mattered. That was the real victory. Even Jake, the golden boy, was left with a lesson he would not forget. When he turned to me, still pleading for guidance, I saw a flicker of humility in his eyes. "Ethan, if I do all that, maybe we can talk," he had asked. I nodded slowly, but the message was clear. Respect and self-sufficiency must come first. No shortcuts, no handouts. Only then could genuine reconciliation be considered. And I knew, deep down, that this was the only way our fractured relationship could ever start to heal. Weeks later, life returned to its natural rhythm. The construction projects kept me busy, my crews trusted and loyal, and every completed build was a testament to perseverance and vision. I hosted cookouts for friends and colleagues who had become family through shared experiences, laughter, and hard work. I laughed freely without fear of judgment, and I felt an overwhelming sense of peace that I had never experienced around my birth family. The mansion, my workshop, my land, they were symbols not just of financial success, but of freedom. Freedom from judgment, from condescension, and from expectations that had never aligned with my own values. As I stood on the balcony overlooking the lake at sunset, I felt the enormity of what I had accomplished. 10 years of struggle, of being undervalued, of being ignored, had culminated in this life I had intentionally crafted. I understood finally that the best revenge wasn't humiliation, wasn't flaunting wealth, and certainly wasn't petty retaliation. The best revenge was living well, authentically and with integrity, while my family remained trapped in their cycle of envy, superficial judgments, and transactional relationships. I thrived in a life built on substance, care, and respect, and in that quiet moment, sipping my coffee as the last rays of sunlight glinted off the lake, I smiled. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the overlooked, undervalued kid from Houston. I was a man who had proven, through action and perseverance, that self-worth and dignity are earned, not given. And for those who had doubted me, all they could do now was witness my success, silent, powerless, and humbled by the reality they had ignored for so long. Some doors, once opened, reveal nothing but emptiness behind them. Others, when closed on the past, allow for the life you were always meant to live. I had chosen the latter, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt the pure, unburdened joy of being truly free.